BraveWords Records, home for Paul Di'Anno's Warhorse, The Chris Slade Timeline, Rhett Forrester and Rob Robbins, Prophets of Addiction, Jack Starr, Esker, Crimson Glory, and Lillian Axe, where music lives. BraveWords Records. Visit bravewordsrecords.com.
Honored to have Mr. Gil Moore of Triumph fame to guest on BraveWords Streaming for Vengeance. Thank you so much. I've been a fan since yay big. Not that I'm dating you, but I have been a huge, huge fan. But can we actually address, since I'm a hockey guy, we have to address the elephant in the room. And were you witnessing that just tragic, most brutal ending? Are you a big fan of the Leafs to begin with?
Yeah, I really am because when I was a kid,
Ah, oh, cool. Wow.
exactly what I wanted to do. Before I played drums, it was the neighborhood I grew up in Erindale. Like you could have lined up all us kids and said, okay, who wants to be, a fire chief? Nobody. Who wants to play music? Nobody. Who wants to be a doctor? Nobody. And so on. And who wants to play in the NHL?
Yeah.
Everybody, 100%. And, our dads were at the time, they were taking us to hockey practices at 4:30 in the morning and
I know.
the drill, never forget that. And it was a great time. But, when you really look at like we were in the Toronto Township Hockey League and you look at the Greater Toronto region, how many people there are, and how many kids were in hockey. And when I think back to those days of all the, as we went from we started in Bantam and then we went to Tadpole B and then we went to Tadpole A and so on. And, as we were getting a little older, there were one or two kids that were outstanding in the whole league. I mean, that somehow managed to make it into the NHL, but it was like that less than 1%. So, I finally realized, oh, it's not going to happen for me. So this whole thing with Rogers Sportsnet and the playoffs this year, I guess the playing late on the line like the national anthem, that's the closest I'm ever going to get to the Stanley Cup.
But I'm a Barry boy. I'm not the biggest Leafs fan. I do it but I'm also a centennial baby, which means I was born in 1967, which is just like the worst number four. It was really, especially watching Game Five. Let's not make it all about this, but it was so heartbreaking. It's like these guys didn't even know what to do or why were even there to begin with. It was just so sad.
Well, I feel like with hockey, the players compare this to music, and I think athletes in general, but hockey players specifically, like they get a bad rap because they go from being heroes to bums overnight. And if that had been that way in music, if I knew that, so we step on the stage in Cincinnati and we're heroes, and we step on the stage in Chicago and people are booing us, I don't think I ever would have played. I don't think I would have Triumph would have kept going. We'd have quit. I mean, and the same thing you could say for any other band that was doing really well, the bands, the Journeys and the Rushes and the Judas Priests and so on that were around us. They never encountered that. But in hockey, you know, I watched, Mitch Marner got just kind of murdered by social media after this is over. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't get it with the fans. I don't think it's good for kids to hear this kind of negativity. And it's just, I get the fact that, okay, so he makes a huge salary. Okay, there were these big expectations, but he's playing a game, like guarantee you that, none of these guys ever that have a game that doesn't work out are going into the game thinking, I'm going to cruise, I'm going to mail it in. They're out there doing their best. But, hockey's there's a lot of stuff that can happen. And I guess if you've played the game, even at the level I did as a kid, you realize, yeah, sometimes the puck bounces left, sometimes it bounces right, sometimes you
Right.
get this deflection, sometimes you don't. I just think the fans get too hard on when they're dissatisfied with their own home team, and I think they should be more supportive. Even in it's great to be gracious in victory, but it's even more important, I think, to be gracious in defeat sometimes.
Now, tell me about working with the NHL because you couldn't escape. And the commercial was amazing, right? The lyrics obviously are totally fitting. I'm just surprised what took the NHL and Triumph so long to work out a deal. It's a perfect hockey song, right?
Yeah, it's funny how you figure that out after the fact. I mean, it's kind of like how we uh, we realized after the fact that a lot of the things that fans relate to about Triumph and what they hold on to relate to the lyrics, mostly the positive lyrics in some of our songs. And we started to get this, in the latter stages. And I think it's because people are getting older, they reflect back on their youth and so on. Sometimes they go through some hard times with family issues or whatever. And they more and more and more we get, you know, communications and photos that come across our Facebook or directly even arrive here at Metalworks Studios on the doorstep that are got through tough times with these songs, through tough times with this song. I have a tattoo on this arm with one lyric. I have a tattoo on this arm with another lyric, and you can see that there's been some of these impacts. So I think with hockey, it was kind of the same thing. It was as those positive lyrics, the follow your heart lyrics, or a fight the good fight lyrics, they've over time that started to become that's what Triumph is associated with. So I think it's just my take on it, how the NHL maybe or Rogers Sportsnet, looked at it and went, well, where can we get a Canadian band that has messaging within their lyrics about perseverance, working hard, success, and those kind of things. So we kind of just we were the round peg in the round hole, I suppose.
Well put. Well put.
We were very grateful for it. I mean, we're all hockey fans. We love the Leafs, but we love the Oilers too. I mean, we love Canadian hockey, so we're here to support Canadian hockey. I mean, obviously we live in Leaf territory here. It would have been lovely to see, the Leafs were always my personal heroes, and would have been lovely to see them. I love being confused with Doug Gilmore, which happens to me about once a year. Somebody will come in,
I,
hey, Doug
I can
Gilmore,
see
and I
it.
just go right along with it. I go, yeah, I was a great hockey player. Thanks for noticing.
Now let's talk about this tribute album. Such an incredible lineup. I have to ask, trying to find this great voice for this great song, and like you guys matched it. But how much of a challenge was that to, you got the set list down? I'm like, who's going to sing this? Who's going to sing this? How did that come about?
That was uh that was Mike Clink, using his knowledge uh that he's built up over the years of working uh with all the really great hard rock musicians. And I think being located in Los Angeles where he is, he's in the epicenter of where a lot of the recording takes place. And of course, the being associated with the Guns N' Roses camp and all the great work he's done with Guns, he's that's there's a lot of musicians, surrounding, that camp. And with Slash has done a lot of solo projects, and so on. The other guys have as well. So there's kind of a group there. And I think the other thing is in consulting with Phil X, because Phil was the first guy Mike called. Obviously, Phil's a Triumph band member, and he was like, Phil, what do you think about this? And Phil was gung-ho to do it. And, without Phil, without Mike, it wouldn't have happened. It wasn't something that Mike, Rick, and Gil were going to do. So it's kind of like they grabbed the ball and they ran with it. And of course, our label were the ones that, put put up the idea and put up the funds in order to do it, because those recording studios are expensive. Um, and it took a long time because it was done during COVID.
Right. Now, it must be pulls at the heartstrings when you look at this all-star lineup that rallies around my band and my songs actually touched other people. Some really who went on to do some great things, right?
Yeah, it really is touching and humbling, because obviously, like, we're certainly not, arrogant enough to think anybody should ever do a tribute to us. One of those things you never consider. You start a band, you're just, trying to, play another job at a high school gym or a local bar and somehow get a little bit ahead. And then the bands that are in that 0.1% that get actually lucky and actually get to play concerts and then bigger concerts and then get a record contract and get a gold record and all these things that come along, and the Hall of Fame stuff and all this, and it comes along, and then suddenly there's this tribute record. You just kind of pinch yourself and go, what the heck? Like these musicians and singers are incredible in their own right. We're fans of so many of them already. Maybe we should have been doing the tribute record to them. Uh, so it's yeah, it's a once in a lifetime experience, Tim. I don't know how to explain it any better than that, other than that it certainly is a really nice thing.
How much actual personal interaction did you have with any of these songs or any of these people, or was it just all Mike kind of just moving it from computer to computer?
It really, Mike, had the wheel on the ship, and he was steering it and navigating it. He would flip, rough cuts and stuff to Mike and Rick and I to listen to and comment on. But most of our comments were, "Yeah, man, keep going. This is awesome." Like listen to that guitar solo, or holy smokes, what a vocal. I mean, the people that he's got on there, and it's the who's who of musicians
Yeah.
and singers, and there just was nothing for us to really do. And not everyone decided to stick to, kind of like I'll call it Triumph's arrangement or whatever.
Right.
Several times there were some really unique styles that were, layered over and really took songs in different directions and so on. Sometimes it was a blend, and sometimes it was fairly close to the original.
Are you getting much? I have to ask you this question because I grew up in Southern Ontario listening to Triumph on this thing called AM and FM radio. You getting much radio play from anywhere in North America with this yet?
Well, I'd say that, some of our songs are staples of classic rock radio, and I don't really know if we get more airplay as a result of this, or not. I would suspect yes. I mean, last couple of weeks in Canada, on the Shazam chart, Light on the Line went number one, and then the next week it was number three, then number seven, then number eight. So to put one of these songs, 40 years later in the top 10, um, shows you there's a lot of interest, and that interest is coming from people that are probably never saw the band, that are younger, uh, because our fans that are there, they know the song, they know who the band is. There's no mystery about that. So that was exciting to see that, and I experience that a lot with young people today that one way or the other figure out who I am and start asking me questions about Triumph, and I'm like, well, you never got to see the band. All you've ever done is it's been YouTube or hearing from your parents or whatever the case may be, and it's nice. A lot of young people do like hard rock, and they have respect for starting right there at Led Zeppelin like we did, and it's great to see music pass forward. Of course, in my generation and probably in yours, yeah, we're never really into our parents' music ever. I know I wasn't, although I gained an appreciation for music from my mother and my father, but not into the music they were listening to. Now that's not the case. A lot of the kids now are here in Toronto, like Q107 and Boom play classic rock. And yeah, lots of kids listen to Boom and classic, Boom and Q and stuff, and they're listening to songs that were recorded many years ago, and maybe there's just not enough hard rock out there right now.
Well, I can feed the world with hard rock. But I hear you're saying, do you miss that golden era of hearing the music on the radio and you know what I mean? It's everything is just kind of it's just a different world, right? Especially with when we grew up. And I know you've got a couple of years on me, but total late 70s, early 80s, and it was like the 6 o'clock rock report or the top 10 at 10, and you know what I mean, much music and all this other stuff. Do you miss that era?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I've, after Triumph, uh, so after we stopped performing with Rick in '88, and we had a bit of a hiatus for a couple of years, and it was a pivotal time in my life personally because it was after my father had passed, and I'm an only child, so I wanted to be in town and stay here to make sure my mother was okay. And I also wanted to be there for my young kids and not be an absentee father. So I had this desire to be here anyway. So I wasn't so much longing after, returning to what was. I was kind of looking at what's the frontier in front of me. And I never wanted to get out of music because I love music. And so kind of getting behind the scenes in Metalwork Studios and growing that. And then subsequently, like, starting our sound and light division and starting our school. They were all things that were great, fun projects. And now I've extended that into a music charity that I just started over the last few years called Sounds Unite Canada that we're launching. And yeah, I have a lot of things that are related to music that keep me really pumped up. So as opposed to miss those or want to go back to answer your question specifically, I'm more like, hey, I like to look back at it. It's fun. It was a great experience, and I think the three of us were super lucky because we met each other, and there's most bands fail, and a lot of it, where the luck comes in is, who do you meet? Would we have the Beatles if John and Paul hadn't met in art school and they had gone to different schools in different towns? That would have maybe had no Beatles. So it's kind of how I look at it. Mike had his bands, Rick had his bands, I had my bands, and none of those bands did anything. And suddenly with Triumph, it was like all of a sudden there's rocket fuel in the tank, and away it goes, almost like has its own momentum. But the luck is getting the three individuals together, agreeing on a direction musically, and I think in our case too, like agreeing on the theatrical nature of what our presentation was going to be like, so that we were trying to be fill the stage, if you will, like with three guys, but still be able to fill the stage. And hopefully, when we got to hopefully getting to the big stage, which we did, of course, be able to fill the big stage.
Now, you were able to figure out this thing called a songwriting craft really early on, like great success, like late 70s, right? Like that must have been a pretty big eye opener when, wow, you had two big hits in the States. And how did CanCon affect all of this at the same time?
CanCon was good for Canadian bands. There's been a lot of argument about it. I don't really understand the argument. I think it's a really simple concept. You know, the government legislated that 30% of Canadian airplay had to be Canadian content or something along those lines. I'm not an expert in this area. So it just meant Canadian bands got a second glance from the program directors that they might not have otherwise. Um, the argument against it, of course, is a lot of bands couldn't translate across the border into America. They were just homegrown talent and they did well in their hometown or in Canada, but couldn't make the success go elsewhere in the world. So therefore, they shouldn't have had subsidized, airplay. I don't buy that. I think that, bands succeed or fail in different jurisdictions or different regions, just sometimes again through the luck of the draw and happenstance and how much time they spend in the region, things of that nature. uh, Triumph, in our case, CanCon helped us get more airplane in Canada. But when we sailed across the border, America greeted us with open arms, and we spent most of our touring days all through all 50 states. And so CanCon wasn't helping us there. We got tons of airplay all over the United States. So I don't know what conclusions you draw from that, but
Well, you were
that's
also
that's the Triumph
releasing,
story.
no, but you were also releasing some of the greatest hard rock or rock albums of all time. Like there was a stretch and a string of them. So there's a damn good reason why you got to play 50 states is because you were that great, right?
Well, that's nice of you to say that. I mean, I just think we were paying attention. We weren't out there partying and being crazy on the road. I mean, we did have a bit of fun, but most of our fun was related to humor. So that was one of the reasons when we went on the stage, like everything was approached more like a sports game. It's almost like back to hockey. Like one of the things that I remember uh, about the Leafs, actually, the first time we played Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto at the time,
Wow.
and realized I'm sitting in the Toronto Maple Leafs dressing room as I'm, putting on my
That's
my
awesome.
stage gear, if you will, and you know, loosening up and taping up my sticks and doing the eucalyptus oil so I can try to sing. Like, and I'm in the Leafs dressing room, and it's just like this kind of thing. You go, hey, I'm in the Leafs dressing room. This is really cool. So, um, anyway, th those were good memories. I sort of went off topic there. What was that
No, no,
question?
this is fun. But
Sideways on you.
do you remember at that Triumph show seeing Harold Ballard in his little booth watching you guys?
It's funny. I remember some things about Harold Ballard, and yeah, I think he really liked Triumph. And when we were playing along in, I remember yesterday I saw somebody sent a ticket stub. It went across my radar, and it was Triumph with Foghat
Wow.
opening for us at Nassau Coliseum on Long Island. So that would have been during a New York swing because we would do Meadowlands Arena in Jersey and then we would do Nassau Coliseum. And I remember we got the call from Harold. There was a young lady that he wanted to see our show. And would the good boys in Triumph be kind enough to leave some tickets at the box office? So our manager did that. And when we came back to Toronto, I think, he was asked for some kind of return favor. I don't know exactly what, but yeah, those were the days when Harold was the king at MLG, and
Oh,
his son Billy Ballard became very friendly with Triumph,
right. Very nice. Very nice.
and Michael Cole, of course.
Right. Let's stick with the US because obviously I wasn't at the show. I was able to see it as a simulcast. The US Festival still is like a tattoo on my brain. And did you guys feel that you fit into Heavy Metal Day? Or was it just like we can't turn down this opportunity? You guys kicked ass, but how did you feel with this whole event? It was just insane. Woodstock.
The Yeah, I felt like we fit in. People have different definitions. I mean, some people thought Triumph was more progressive rock. Some people thought we were more hard rock, but not heavy metal. I mean, these genre, the nuances between these genres were, just starting to be understood. But, if you look at, say, Scorpions, we were on there with Scorpions. Like, what's the difference between a
Exactly.
Scorpions and a Triumph, or a Van Halen for that matter? You've got guitar solos, you've got somewhat melodic vocals. When you get Judas Priest in there, they were obviously played right before us. And I love Judas Priest and a little more I'd call metal, in their approach. Same thing with Ozzy, who was on there. But then again, there was, Ozzy had a lot of different shades to his music. Van Halen, they had some poppy stuff and they had some stuff that was harder edged and, different sort of contexts between, uh, you know, uh, the era that they were in, or the album, I should say, that they were working on at the time. And yeah, I thought it was a great bill, to be honest. I thought all the bands, there was a natural progression between the bands as they played, and I thought the audience, got what they were looking for. Like that day was a massive success, um, from a standpoint of crowd size.
Yeah, maybe not financially, unfortunately, right?
Well, Steve, I got to know Steve very well, and Steve was not out to make money
Right.
on the show, and I think he set it up in such a way that it was impossible to make money.
Right.
He pretty much constructed the venue. He brought in the biggest sound system. Uh, on it was a double XL sound system, and like a double XL stage and double XL lighting, and then the accoutrements, for the venue, like he just spared no expense. and then he overpaid all the bands. So just to keep everybody happy or something, because he was a new promoter. So a lot of artists, their managers and agents would be like, well, we're not going to play for somebody new.
Right.
It's going to be, a known promoter. So Bill Graham, being the, kind of the godfather of California promoters, was brought in, and then Barry Fay was involved as well. And Barry Fay was, uh, the big massive promoter in the Denver region. So you had these, really, really the best in class promoters that were involved. And so it wasn't just, kind of Steve, who was a guy out of the computer industry, wanted to do these concerts. He brought in the best people
Right.
from the concert industry, and that's why there were no screw ups. That's why, other than losing a pile of money, which is, you wouldn't be the first big festival to lose a pile of money. But I think in this case, his intentions, because I get to know Steve very well, his intentions were not to make money.
Right.
It's well known that he had this idea of the satellite connection to Russia, and some people confused the U.S. and thought it was the U.S. festival. It wasn't U.S. at all. It was us. And the reason that he chose that word is he saw music as a form of bonding people to each other, which to this day that's very important to me. And this,
Yeah.
paradoxically, that's what I'm in my Sounds Unite charity. That's what I'm trying to do, is build up music learning and the therapeutic benefits of music to help kids, cognitively and socially and in every other way, because I really think music's a medicine. Well, he saw it that way at that time, and that's why he looked to Russia. And he said, "Well, if the Cold War is there, if that's where our perceived problems are in the world, perhaps music can create a thread that will pull us closer to each other." So, you know, um, that's kind of where Steve was coming from, and it wasn't about, oh, I'm gonna cash. He'd made so much money on Apple. He didn't
Right.
care about making any money on this concert.
Silly question. Do you remember what was on your rider?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like all bands have, riders, and the quintessential joke was the Van Halen "No Brown Smarties" thing, and other, sort of jokes about that. And what we did is we had a rider that was built as if we were holding a reception at the end of the show, because occasionally you had to do that, like in LA, where your record company was located, or New York where your record company was located, and all of a sudden it was like the cavalry would come to the gig, and you'd have to have a figure out a way to have like a meet and greet and stuff. But what our tour manager would do is essentially, just go cut, 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 cut. These guys don't like Triumph are very simple. Like they just want ham and cheese sandwiches in the dressing room, and some Diet Coke or whatever. And you can cut all the booze rider, and you cut all this fancy stuff, because really, if it was there only if we needed it for other people. Um, and a lot of the gigs, this is the thing, our motivation was not just to play, the Chicagos and the Clevelands and Detroits and the big cities, New York. That wasn't the motivation. We wanted to play. We went to Chicago. We wanted to go in the surrounding. We wanted to go to Rockford, or we wanted to go to Champaign. We wanted to go to Peoria. We wanted to go. It wasn't just Indianapolis. It was like moving over into Terre Haute and things like that. And we had that approach of playing for the people, getting to the right in front of the people, which is why I think our fans have been so uh, monumentally loyal, is because we would go to where they were, and didn't just play the major markets, and have, if you couldn't get there and you couldn't afford the ticket, then too bad. We went into the smaller markets where the tickets were less, and the venues were closer to the fans.
There's a lot of people that have issues walking and chewing gum, for example. How does a drummer sing and sing in tune? And where was the influence for you to do that? Tell me about
Well,
that history.
that's a funny story. So I started singing because I was playing in this band when I was a teenager, and the singer quit, and we had a job at Honey Harbor, which is just in cottage country here
I
in
know where
North.
Honey Harbor is. I've been there.
And yeah, and it was in this one of these old-fashioned wooden dance pavilions that has no windows, so it was just like loaded with mosquitoes in the summer. And we were going to get $100. And we were not losing that $100 anytime soon because we had to pay the rental on our PA and stuff like that. And
Wow.
so, and these were the days of you all piled into the back of one van. You had no crew, you just no roadies, you just did it all yourself. And so I phoned a buddy of mine in another band who was a lead singer, and I said, "Joe, can you help me out?" I said, he said, "What?" And I said, "Well, I got to teach everybody in our band to sing all at once because our singer quit." And he said, "Yeah, yeah, I'll come over." So he came to a rehearsal and he says, "Okay, he lined us all up, and said, 'Let me hear you. And let me hear you. Okay, let me hear you. Okay, you're all terrible. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this." And then he did individual coaching. So with me, it was deemed that I could maybe sound somewhat remotely like John Kay from Steppenwolf, right?
Mhm.
And so the first song he gave me was Sookie Sookie. And he said, "Okay, so you can play the song, you're fine on drums." And I had the microphone here. He says, "So I'm going to get next to you. I'm going to sing the song as you're playing drums. And you are going to, like, on one mic together, and you are going to sing along with me." And so, you know, that's exactly what we did. So we played Sookie 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 like, till I was Sookie in the face.
That's
And
crazy.
eventually I could actually, yeah, he did it so many times I could actually do it. And then he says, "Okay, now we're going to do Magic Carpet Ride, or whatever the next song was, or we're going to do Born to Be Wild, right?" So we started like that, and then I got moved over into some Hendrix songs and stuff. And he did it with each guy in a band. So, and the rest is history. We went, we played, we got bitten by mosquitoes, and we got $100. So it was a great outcome. And those are the spinal tap stories that bands are all familiar with. So when Triumph started, I thought, well, thank God I don't have to sing because Rick Emmett, he's great. And so we went to the first rehearsal after we jammed and decided he was in the band. And they looked at me and they said, "Well, like Rick sings really high, and plus he's really energetic on stage, and Mike's really energetic on stage. So there's a lot of not choreography, but sort of like uh, unbridled enthusiasm going on the front stage. And so to really engage the audience and do some of the things we wanted to do, we were starting to dream up lighting effects and what would happen here and what would happen there. Well, Rick can't just be stuck in front of his mic stand. So Gil, over to you. You're going to have to sing." And I'm like, "Oh no, not again." I thought I was done with that. And
Wow.
so we did that. That's exactly what happened. So we had no original songs because we were just starting. So it was like back, okay, so you used to sing Jimi Hendrix songs, right? And I went, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, here we go. So here I go. I'm Hendrix again. And and then I got some Deep Purple and so on. And Rick did all the Jim Led Zeppelin stuff. And that was it. It was through necessity. And but the benefit, I think, I didn't figure it out until decades later. So here at Metalworks, I did a fundraiser for Baycrest, which is a dementia hospital here in Toronto. And what they had asked was, could they play our documentary for a bunch of their donors and then bring the donors to one of our auditoriums here at our school, and would I do a Q&A on that related to the documentary and so on. I said, "Sure, let's do it. Let's raise the money." And through that, I met their chief neuroscientist, is a wonderful woman named Alison Secular. And she was on the podium after my interview, and she was pointing at the video screen, and it was her playing drums on the screen. And when I asked her afterwards, why she asked me first, "Well, I'd like to use Sounds Unite with dementia patients." And I went, "Sure, that'd be great. I'm not sure how it would work. We had to figure that out." But
Hmm.
uh, I said, why? And she said, well, I think it'd be great for them, and I've got some ideas about how it might work. And I said, well, why did you take up drums? I'm curious. And she said, because drums fires more neurons, and there's more activity in the brain than other instruments. And that was the first joke I made was, well, why weren't you singing at the same time? So we had a good laugh, and then I told her another four or five of my drummer jokes. Some are good, some are not so good, but and we became very friendly, talking about drums and drum jokes and so on. And so she's involved with the Live Lab at McMaster University, where they're doing amazing brain research on music in the brain. And they can put 2 dozen skull caps on people and test them while they're dancing to music or listening to music or playing, performing music or engineering music, any number of these things. And she introduced me to that world, and I started to realize, yeah, actually, I was lucky that I was singing, because it is, as you say, like it's another thing that your activity, that your brain is doing all this stuff with your arms and hands, but you're also remembering the words. You're also engaged in this physical activity of, trying to maintain pitch and so on, which is really difficult to do when you're playing drums and your guitars are blaring. Your pitch kind of goes out the window a lot, but unless you're some of these guys on the tribute album that are like uh, unbelievable world-class singers, like Dean Castronovo, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah,
in
for sure.
Journey. I mean, golly, you know, or Joey Belladonna. Wow, there's a singing drummer that can really sing.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. It's if you get Mike Levine, his massive bass guitar blaring in the back of your head on one side, and then Rick Hammett's Marshall stacks over here, and you're trying to hear what the heck you're doing. It's not simple. It's a lot of fun trying.
Hilarious. I got a couple more questions if you got time. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I'm not, I'm no, I'm good.
I just finished Brothers from Alex Van Halen. And I remember I grew up Barry Minor hockey. One of the brothers of one of my playmates said you have to hear this Van Halen record. So we listened to Van Halen record and heard Eruption. I'm like, there can't be anything better than Eruption out there. And he said, no, you need to listen to this. And he put on Rock and Roll Machine. And I kind of had the dates, and Rock and Roll Machine came out like 3 months before Van Halen 1, right? Or it's wow, you got to hear this still solo. So I sat there as like a 10-year-old kid. I'm like, holy shit. It's not just Eruption out there, right?
Yeah, that's quite the solo. And the thing was kind of cool is, I mean, Rick changed it up a little bit over the years, but he stayed true to the a lot of the original aspects. Uh, and
Yeah,
I never get tired of it. I don't think the audience did either. Like, obviously I looked at it like, hey, this is great. I get a break in music. That's called a tassette, right? So I'd always look at Mike Levine and go, tassette, you know, and here goes Rocket. And he'd knock that solo, and then we would start up again after it was over. And I think a lot of people really identify with that song. And on the tribute album, Mike picked Sebastian to sing it because Sebastian had sung that song on stage with Triumph more than once, just in the house, in the audience. Hey, Sebastian, come on up here and jam with us. And he would sing Rock and Roll Machine. So we knew he could smoke the vocal
right.
big time. And yeah, that's how that song ended up getting fitted.
That's great. Great story. I was speaking to Mike Fraser about from Little Mountain Studios, AC/DC, resumes. He said one of the reasons that Little Mountain Studios actually attracted so many, I mean, Mötley Crüe, Whitesnake, was the loading bay. They had set up the drums. Chris Slade told me this too. The loading bay had this fucking thunderous, so bands wanted that. Um, Tell me about what attracted bands to Metalworks. What was like that selling point where we got to record there?
I think part of it is the sound of the studio for sure. Because when we in the very early days there was just Studio One, whereas now we got nearly 10 studios here, including the ones in our schools and stuff. But that first studio was the big, you know, from, modeled after the studios from England, like all the early studios were with the tongue and groove pine and a lot of live reflections on the live floor. So the live floor was the Wild West. It wasn't engineered the way studios are now with acoustical prediction software and things like that. This was not designed in AutoCAD. This was designed by, hey, let's put this over there. That's how it was designed. Now, by people who knew what they were doing. I'm not talking about someone that wasn't an engineer, but nonetheless, kind of like if you thought about cooking before the cookbook was written and a chef was like, I know how to make this recipe and I'm just going to put a bit of this and a bit of that.
Hmm.
Trust me. So that's how those rooms were designed. And I think, yeah, we had a loading bay as well. And actually, before we built Studio 6, we always had not only a loading bay, but a warehouse as well. So we had different acoustic environments. We also had a ton of what I'll call the real old-fashioned reverbs, which would simulate, um, you know, a larger room, let's say, or those sorts of things. But you really, in an ideal situation, a recording studio, you have smaller studios and larger studios, and the smaller studios provide more. They provide a room compression that you don't have in a big room, and they also sometimes can produce different impacts. Um, in terms of the elimination of standing waves and so on if they're engineered properly. Whereas in our big studio one, like no, you had to figure out as an engineer how to control all of that, which led to some different nuances to the shading of things that could be quite interesting, depending on the mic placement and the performance and the skill of the recording engineer. To this day, I mean, I think that's preferred. It's almost one of those things the way, audiophiles prefer vinyl to anything else. Engineers, if they have their druthers when they're recording, they still prefer those, great Neumann microphones that were made 60 years ago. They still prefer Neve consoles that were made 50 or 60 years ago. They still prefer the style of room that was developed in the UK many, many years ago and brought over to North America. Yeah, that hasn't changed much. Musicians dig it too. They just the vibe.
Right. Right.
Even though now most of the recordings are to Pro Tools, or they're to digital recordings, but there's still a lot of analog gear in those rooms. And the consoles themselves primarily are analog consoles, like all the Neves are. The live consoles have really made it big time into live performing, like pretty much all the live performing consoles now are digital, but you get back into the studio, like the real deal is the analog stuff.
As you were growing up as a band, were you paying attention to other three-piece legendary bands that were making beautiful noise? I put that in question marks and no disrespect, like ZZ Top, Rush, Motorhead, and I love Exciter, who has a drummer that sings. But were you looking at these guys saying, okay, you only got three people, so how are you creating?
Yeah, we definitely before we found Rick, Mike's band before he'd always been in big bands with horns and stuff. So he'd have like 10 people in his bands, and I was like in the 4 or 5 range. But I always thought there's always one guy getting kicked out, or there's one guy, somebody joining. So it's always that one, the fifth guy that comes and goes. And so when we were chatting about, the idea of maybe we were almost ready to quit, to be honest with you. It's like, okay, I don't know what we should do. Let's take 2 weeks off and then quit. Um, because it's hard. And we just decided, no, we'll take one shot, one serious shot now. Because if this doesn't work, nothing's going to work. Okay. So we sat down to ourselves and we said, 3 guys, let's start there because we love the idea of a power trio. And if you kind of look at what, Cream, with Clapton, ZZ Top you mentioned, which is pretty much my favorite band to this day. ZZ was starting up just before that, and Big Sound for a three-piece band.
Hmm.
Um, Jimi Hendrix. I mean, what can you say about how Hendrix impacted everybody, and also took the sort of the performing thing to another level with the lighting his guitar on fire, all the stuff. Um, that he did on stage that just kind of you could just see so many of his lyrics tied into what he was doing and the energy level. And in the bands I played in before Triumph, where we would play Hendrix material, I just loved every single song. And the ferocity that Mitch Mitchell had on the kit, uh, that was an inspiration. Although I was a blues drummer beforehand, so this was kind of like a new place, this three-piece band power trio thing. It was quite a leap, I'll say, from playing R&B and blues, Chicago blues, and so on into that area. But yeah, it was by design. Motorhead hadn't come along yet, so Motorhead weren't part of it. Um, I would say really, yeah, I think Hendrix, Cream, and maybe to a lesser degree ZZ Top were the groups that really got us thinking that way. That maybe, hey, maybe we can do this with three guys, but we have to have the right three guys because you have to cover a lot of ground with three musicians.
Just a couple more quickies for you. Kind of left field fun questions. I call it the Brave Words Rapid Fire. Well, Jane actually Andrews gave me permission to use Streaming for Vengeance. This was like just when COVID started, so I'm a huge Judas Priest fan. But the moment when you decided music was your life, and did you have family support?
Yeah, I know I broke my dad's heart and probably my mom's too when I quit school because I quit school very, very early to be a drummer. And that's why I started so young, is because I didn't even finish high school. And I was very fortunate to have the parents that I had. I miss them so much, right to this day, both of them. And my dad I could tell he was kind of holding back tears when I told him, like I'm out, I quit, I signed myself out of school. And he said, well, if you're going to be a drummer, Gil, be the best drummer that you can possibly be. And that was sorry about that.
No problem.
Uh, that was his advice, and I was really lucky that like I had parental support, which now having a school and seeing kids that don't have it in some cases, and I feel like, gee, I was the luckiest guy. You take your parents for granted when you're a kid. For the most part, you don't appreciate them, and like Joni said, you don't appreciate it until it's gone, um, fully. So I just try to, I asked my dad when he was 75, I said, you know, I can never pay you back for what you did in my life. Like he not only stood behind me going into drums, but he helped because we didn't know how to manage money or anything. And he managed all the money for us and made sure that our agents got paid and that everybody in the band got a check every week so we could keep going and pay our bills. And he t taught me business inside out, which without I never would have been able to, you know, do the things I've been able to do through Metalworks. Um, yeah, I wish everybody could have great parents, but it's not like that. Um, you don't choose your parents. It's just something that happens to you.
Who's your rock star?
Who's my rock star?
Yeah.
Billy Gibbons would be one for sure. Um, just somehow what he turns out of that neck of his guitar. I don't know where it comes from someplace special. Another guitar player that he's not with us anymore, Leslie West. I had to be buddies with Leslie West, and the first day I ever heard Mississippi Queen, I thought that's just some of the most sweet guitar I've ever heard.
I know.
And I like blues guitars, so I liked Albert King, for example. But when I heard Leslie, kind of taking what I would call that blues style and making it something, I don't know, even more than what I'm not a guitar player, obviously, so I'm not the judge of guitar players, but from my position as either an audience member or a drummer, whichever I was, uh, yeah, he just had that feel on the guitar that was beyond belief. And so those two guys, I guess, when I look back, Billy Gibbons and Leslie West have been my two guys. But I gotta tell you, Tim, like I was blessed to have played with Rick Emmett, and then after the main run with Triumph, I mean, because Rick is, as you know, is a phenomenal guitar player, and then to play with Phil X, who is a completely different style, but also just a phenomenal virtuoso guitarist. So I feel really blessed. Anytime in a three-piece band, if the guitar player isn't top drawer, well, you're not even getting past first base.
Right, right.
The guitar player is ultimately the most important instrument um, in a power trio.
Have you ever asked for an autograph?
No, but my wife did once. I was at a golf tournament and Jack Nicklaus was very nearby, and I said,
Wow.
"Oh, man, I'd love to have Jack's autograph." And my wife said, go get it." And I said, "No, I'm not going to ask his autograph, and I don't do that." And so she said, "I'll get it for you." Pretty blonde lady walks up, and before you know it, the sea parted, and Jack was like, "Oh yes, young lady," and there you go. So that's how I got Jack Nicklaus's autograph.
That's really no,
Yeah. The only other autograph I wanted was Frank Mahalich's, and I got that too because his son recorded here at Metalworks. And yeah, I've got that one.
that's crazy. What do you think about the vinyl craze, and what was your first vinyl purchase, if you can recall?
I was buying singles, and they were R&B singles. So, a lot of the stuff from Stax Volt, stuff that Atlantic was putting out at the time, like Wilson Pickett and, James Brown on King Records, and um, but also some of the British Invasion stuff, like the Beatles and the Dave Clark Five and so on, all the stuff on Capitol. Those were all 45, obviously. But it pretty soon migrated into the blues. Like the British Invasion really didn't impact me too much. I was aware of it, but I kind of migrated into the blues and then got past the singles and started, albums, Bobby Blue Bland and Albert King and, learned all about Howling Wolf and some of the greats in that era. And I've never ever gotten past loving the blues or having the blues as my favorite music. Um, in terms of what I'll call, popular music. For listening, I prefer classical music to anything else. Uh, but it depends on the time. Classical music is to relax. If you've got the family in the SUV and it's like, "Oh, we're going to the beach. Okay, time for Billy Gibbons.
Yeah, she's got
I'm mad and I'm nationwide. Stand back."
last question. Last question. Triumph, well known for one of the greatest live shows. Um, do you remember your first concert? And what is a band that blew your mind watching live?
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, Johnny Winter, Ted Nugent, I would say those two. Um, just the sheer power uh, that Ted had and the athletic nature. He was a young man, and the way he just approached the stage and Derek St. Holmes was with him, and they just had such a tight, like, rhythm engine going.
Yeah,
And there's also a magic moment. It's like, well, where did you see him? When did you see him? Who are you with? It's just like so many fans relate to a band. They relate to a single concert. I know where I was sitting. I know what I was doing. And I just thought, that was when Free for All, he'd released Free for All. And I thought, wow, that's a freight train of a record. And I'd say the other one was Johnny Winter. So again, similar in that uh, there was the guitar in Johnny's case again, three piece. Forgot about that when I saw him the night in particular here in Toronto at the Gardens, and when he when he came out. We played many shows with him later on in his later years. Um, when he was suffering with his health and so on, it was kind of hard for him to watch that, but he still wanted to keep playing. But the performances, again, different style, of course, very, very bluesy, very, very, very much old school blues guitar, but combined with rock. And the way the rhythms were built around the songs, and the way with the three-piece format, the way they were delivered, and of course Johnny's vocals, uh, I just thought were completely underrated. I thought the way he put his own signature on the songs that he was doing. I remember hearing him do Jumpin' Jack Flash, and I thought, man, nobody could possibly do Jumpin' Jack Flash uh, better than Johnny Winter. Not to mention Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo was just another one, was just like,
Right.
and I could go on and on about Johnny Winter and those songs. I think those were probably the concerts for me that were the most. One last one. When I was younger still, um, I by a complete fluke, I got to attend like a private concert with Buddy Rich and his band, and I got to stand. Buddy was only on like an 8-inch riser, and I got to stand right at the front because I was a kid, and people said, "Oh, let the kids be at the front." So I was, maybe 3 feet from his bass drum. So it was better than a ringside seat. I mean, I was like literally all I could reach out if I'd wanted to stick my hand out. I didn't, but I could have reached out and touched his bass drum. And to experience Buddy Rich, if any drummer can relate to this, like all the great drummers that are on our tribute album, I'm sure they'd all say, "Holy smokes, that must have been something to be young and be right in front of these things." And you're listening and you're kind of going, "Eh, he must have more than two arms. He must have more than two legs." It's just a unmistakable. It sounds like the cavalry is coming at you from that drum set, but it's all nuanced to the flourishes within his band and the subtle changes in rhythm and so on and so forth. There's no one, in my humble opinion, there's no one that's ever achieved on drums what Buddy Rich achieved. Uh, Never since.
So I have to ask, did Neil Peart ever hear that story?
Neil and I had
Burning for
some.
Buddy, right? That was
Yeah,
him and Keith Moon, right?
yeah. It's interesting. I've heard that Neil mentioned in interviews he was influenced by Keith Moon. Uh, I've spoken to Neil a couple of times here at Metalworks when Rush was recording and so on. Didn't bring that particular Buddy Rich story up, but I know that he was also a super Buddy Rich fan because, of course, of his recording that was centered around on Buddy Rich. And Neil, it's too bad that we've lost Neil. What a great musician, a great Canadian as well, and a wonderful person, and one of the greatest drummers of all time for sure. Just an amazing, amazing Canadian. Uh, Neil is.
Wow, what a somber note. But uplift.
Yeah, I'm sorry to end on a somber note. I mean, the good news, Getty and Al are still, they're doing great. And, Alex, God bless Alex, played on our tribute record with Envy of None, and
Right.
our other Canadian friends in that band, Alfio and Andy and David and so on. And of course, Maya layered in those amazing vocals and took Blinding Light Show in a whole new direction, made it an Envy of None song. It doesn't sound anything like Triumph. We
Amazing.
thought it was we thought it was wonderful.
Nice, nice. Gil, thank you so much. What a treasure. What a beautiful hour of conversation. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, nice talking to you, Tim, and thanks for having me on.